Why is it that the moment you realize you've lost her, you suddenly become desperate to prove you've changed? And why does that desperation actually push her further away? But here's what's really messing with your head right now. There's a psychological principle at play that explains exactly why your current approach is backfiring. And once you understand this principle, everything about getting her back becomes clear. But I need to tell you something first that might sound counterintuitive. The biggest mistake you're making isn't what you think it is. You think the problem is that you messed up, but that's not actually the problem. The real problem is what you're doing right now, in this moment, as you're trying to fix it. And this mistake is so common that 90% of guys make it without even realizing it. You're trying to convince her you've changed instead of actually changing. And there's a massive difference between these two approaches. One pushes her away permanently, the other has the potential to draw her back. But here's the thing about the approach that actually works. It requires you to do something that goes against every instinct you have right now. Think about what happened when you first met her. You weren't trying to prove anything. You weren't desperate for her validation. You were just being yourself, living your life, and she was attracted to that authenticity. But now you're operating from a completely different energy. You're operating from lack, from desperation, from the need to convince her of something. And women can sense this energy immediately. It's not even conscious. It's primal. When someone is trying to convince you of something, especially something emotional, your natural response is to resist. Your guard goes up. You start looking for evidence that contradicts what they're trying to sell you. So every text you send, explaining how you've changed, every gesture you make to show you care, every promise you make about being different, it's all working against you. Because you're coming from the wrong place. You're coming from a place of trying to manipulate an outcome instead of genuinely transforming yourself. But here's where it gets interesting. There's a specific psychological phenomenon that explains why some couples get back together after devastating breakups while others never recover. And it has nothing to do with how much you loved each other or how compatible you were. It has everything to do with something psychologists call the contrast principle. The contrast principle explains why your current approach is failing. Right now, she's comparing the person you're being now, this desperate, pleading version of yourself, to the person she fell in love with originally. And the contrast is stark. The person she fell in love with was confident, had their own life, wasn't hanging on her every word or analyzing her every response. But there's a way to use the contrast principle in your favor. And this is where most guys give up too early, because they don't understand how long real change takes to become visible to someone who's been hurt by you. When someone has been hurt by you, they don't just need to see that you've changed. They need to see that you've changed for reasons that have nothing to do with them. Because if you've changed just to get them back, what happens when you do get them back? You'll revert to who you were before because the motivation for change is gone. This is why the most powerful thing you can do right now is something that will feel completely wrong. You need to disappear from her world completely, not as a strategy to get her back, but as a necessity for your own transformation, because you cannot become a different person while you're still trying to manage someone else's perception of you. Here's what I mean by disappearing. No social media stalking, no casual check-ins, no attempts to stay friends, no showing up at places you know she'll be. Complete radio silence. And this isn't about playing games or making her miss you. This is about creating the space you need to do the real work of changing. Because here's what happens during this period of no contact. Initially, you'll feel like you're going crazy. You'll want to break the silence. You'll want to know what she's doing, who she's with, whether she's thinking about you. This is normal. This is your brain trying to maintain the old patterns that kept you stuck. But if you can push through this initial discomfort, something incredible starts to happen. You stop defining yourself by her reaction to you. You stop measuring your worth by whether she responds to your messages or likes your posts. You start remembering who you were before this relationship, and more importantly, who you want to become. And this is where the real work begins, because now you're not changing to get her back. You're changing because you recognize that the person you were in that relationship wasn't the person you want to be. The patterns that led to your mistakes, they're not just relationship patterns, they're life patterns. Maybe you have a tendency to take people for granted when you feel secure. Maybe you struggle with communication when things get difficult. Maybe you have unresolved issues from your past that affect how you show up in relationships. Whatever it is, this is your opportunity to address it at the root level. But here's the crucial part that most people miss. You don't just address these issues intellectually. You don't just read about them or talk about them or make plans to change them. You actually start living differently. You start making different choices in small daily situations that nobody else even notices. You start being the kind of person who follows through on commitments, even small ones. You start being the kind of person who communicates directly instead of assuming others can read your mind. You start being the kind of person who takes responsibility for their emotions instead of making them someone else's problem. And you do this work quietly, without fanfare, without posting about it on social media or telling mutual friends about your transformation. Because the moment you start performing your change for an audience, it stops being real change and becomes manipulation again. During this period, something else happens that's equally important. You start building a life that you're genuinely excited about. You start pursuing interests that matter to you. You start forming connections with people who appreciate who you're becoming. You start creating experiences that fulfill you regardless of whether she's part of them. This isn't about making her jealous or showing her what she's missing. This is about rediscovering what makes you feel alive, what gives your life meaning beyond any relationship. Because if your happiness depends entirely on whether one person chooses to be with you, you're not ready for a healthy relationship anyway. Now here's where the contrast principle comes back into play. If enough time passes, if you've done the real work of changing, if you've built a life you're proud of, there might come a moment when your paths cross again. Maybe through mutual friends, maybe by chance, maybe because one of you reaches out after months of silence. And when that moment comes, she won't be seeing the desperate person who was trying to convince her to come back. She'll be seeing someone who has genuinely transformed, someone who clearly doesn't need her validation to feel good about themselves, someone who has become the person they were always capable of being. That contrast between who you were when she left and who you've become in her absence, that's what has the power to change everything. Not because you've manipulated the situation, but because you've actually done the work of becoming someone different. But here's the most important part of all of this. Even if she never comes back, even if this transformation doesn't lead to reconciliation, you will have become someone who doesn't repeat the same mistakes. You will have become someone who can handle love without sabotaging it. You will have become someone who attracts healthy relationships because you're finally healthy yourself. The path to getting her back isn't about winning her over. It's about becoming someone who wouldn't have lost her in the first place. And that journey starts the moment you stop trying to convince her you've changed and start actually changing instead.